I never expected a single decision to dismantle everything I thought I knew about my family. The moment I stepped through the front door, I could feel it, the cold hum of secrets waiting to explode. My name is Harper, and I learned that day that innocence isn't just fragile. It can be stolen, wrapped in excuses, and sold to the highest bidder. It all started with a letter. Not the kind with balloons or congratulations, but the kind with a sharp edge, printed in black ink and carrying more weight than my entire year of high school anxiety. The letter came from my grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Bennett, a woman whose reputation for calm authority was only matched by the subtlety of her warnings. The envelope had no return address, which was unusual. I sliced it open, and the first line made me drop the pen. I'd been nervously twisting between my fingers. Harper, what you hold in your hands is more than paper. It's a lifeline and a warning. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. My parents had done something reckless, something irreversible, something that threatened to uproot the tiny corner of the world I felt I actually belonged in. I grabbed my backpack, tossing in my sketch pad and headphones, the usual armor I carried around like an invisible shield, and headed toward the car. I didn't speak to my parents about the letter. They were busy with a weekend project, laughing like the world owed them amusement. My little brother, Owen, was sprawled across the couch, playing some video game that screamed in digital chaos, completely oblivious. My mom didn't notice my quiet exit, and my dad didn't pause his lecture to Owen on why golf was superior to any other sport. That left me alone with my thoughts. The drive to my grandmother's house was unusually silent. No radio, no complaints, just me and the heavy hum of tension that filled the car like a storm cloud you couldn't outrun. I watched the trees whip past, every familiar turn in the neighborhood a reminder of how much my life felt like it was spinning out of control. When I arrived, the house looked the same: brick walls, ivy climbing with reckless determination, windows reflecting the late morning sun. But I knew the calm exterior was a lie. The letter had promised disruption, the kind you feel in your chest before you even knock. I rapped on the front door, and Eleanor herself answered, her posture still impossibly straight, the lines of her face holding both warmth and judgment. Her eyes met mine, and I felt unspoken recognition of shared history, the kind that carried more weight than love or anger alone. She didn't smile, but the quiet intensity of her gaze made me feel simultaneously seen and understood. "Harper," she said, voice smooth but edged with warning. "You're here because something has been taken that doesn't belong to them. Am I right?" I nodded slowly, unable to articulate the jumble of dread and relief swirling inside me. She stepped aside, allowing me into a living room that smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, the kind of scent that belonged to rules and unspoken truths. I knew then, before she even spoke again, that my parents had crossed a line. Something precious, something meant for me. And Eleanor Bennett never let theft or disrespect slide quietly. My chest tightened as she gestured toward the envelope I still clutched. "We have work to do," she said, and just like that, the quiet house felt like the command center for a battle I hadn't yet realized I was entering. I followed her through the house, each step echoing against the hardwood floors, and felt the weight of expectation settle on my shoulders. Eleanor moved with the kind of precision that made everything in her path seem deliberate, the way she always did. Whether she was arranging the antique clock on the mantel or, as I suspected, orchestrating consequences my parents wouldn't see coming. She led me to a small study at the back, the kind of room where secrets didn't hide. They lounged on shelves and leather-bound volumes stacked with careful authority. Sunlight cut across the desk, illuminating the envelope I still hadn't opened. Eleanor didn't ask me to sit, but I did anyway, pulling my sketchpad to my chest like a shield. "Harper, listen carefully," she said, sliding a chair across the floor and lowering herself into it with a calm that made the air feel heavier. "What your parents did isn't just reckless. It's illegal. And it's personal." My stomach turned over at the last word. personal because I knew she meant me. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the sudden rush of anger and betrayal that welled in my chest. I wanted to scream, to throw the letter across the room, to accuse them of all the ways they'd failed me. But instead, I stayed silent. Eleanor's gaze didn't soften, and somehow that made it even scarier. She tapped the envelope with a long, elegant finger. "This," she said, "documents ownership, guardianship, and intention. Everything your parents ignored. Everything they tried to rewrite for their comfort." My hands itched to tear open the papers, but I let her continue. She explained in that precise voice that demanded attention how the cello, my grandmother's legacy, my inheritance, my anchor, had been deliberately entrusted to me. Not them, not their idea of fairness, not the house, not the pool. Me. I pictured the cello, its polished wood gleaming in the music room I hadn't been allowed to visit lately. The memory made my chest tighten in both longing and fury. My parents had taken it, sold it for something as superficial as a backyard swimming hole and tried to convince themselves it was harmless. I'd felt the betrayal in the pit of my stomach weeks ago, and now Eleanor was confirming it. The instrument wasn't just valuable, it was mine, and they had no right. My grandmother's words didn't just tell me I had a claim. They reminded me that I mattered. That in a family trained to ignore, dismiss, and take my existence, my needs, my passions were recognized. She leaned back, her eyes scanning the room as if measuring my reaction. "We're going to get it back," she said softly. And yet it carried the weight of a command, not a suggestion. I realized then that it wouldn't be easy. My parents were stubborn, practiced in the art of evasion. They would resist, they would bargain, they would try to rewrite history again. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of certainty. I wasn't alone. I had Eleanor. And I had proof, documentation that couldn't be dismissed, ignored, or reinterpreted with convenience. I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me despite the storm swirling in my chest. "What's the plan?" I asked, voice steadier than I expected. Eleanor smiled faintly, just a hint, because she never wasted energy on dramatics. "First," she said, "we gather everything. Documentation, witnesses, evidence of timing. Every social media post, every text, every slip of the truth." Then she paused and her eyes locked onto mine. "We remind them that consequences are real." And I never lose. I exhaled slowly, realizing the fight ahead would be messy, public, and unavoidable, but also necessary. For once, the adults in my life wouldn't get to decide what mattered at my expense. The next morning, I woke with the same tight knot of anticipation curling in my chest. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping my bedroom in gold and shadow, and for a moment I let myself imagine the cello sitting on its stand, polished and safe, waiting just for me. But reality was harsher. The cello was still in the hands of my parents, who had no idea the storm was coming. I dressed quickly, the nerves making my fingers clumsy as I pulled on jeans and a hoodie, feeling like armor in a war one hadn't yet declared. Breakfast was quiet. Owen was glued to his tablet, my mom humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like avoidance, and my dad reading the newspaper, like he hadn't made the biggest mistake of our lives. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The letter and Eleanor's instructions were enough to carry me forward. The drive to my parents' house was longer than I expected. My heart thumped in my ears with every familiar turn, every stop sign, every corner that reminded me of ordinary days now tainted with betrayal. I rehearsed my lines in my head, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because Eleanor had made it clear that clarity was power, ambiguity favored them, hesitation favored them. The moment I stepped through that front door, I needed to be precise. I pushed open the door, and immediately the house smelled the same. The faint scent of lemon cleaner my mom used obsessively. The underlying aroma of takeout she always claimed was a treat. And something else. I couldn't name greed, maybe, or the sense of entitlement that had allowed them to make a child's possession vanish without a second thought. They were in the living room, my dad on the couch scrolling his tablet, My mom perched on the armrest like she owned the place, and Owen bouncing excitedly between them. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward, holding the envelope Eleanor had sent me like a shield. "We need to talk," I said, voice steady, stronger than I felt. Their heads lifted, and I saw the first flickers of unease. My mom's smile faltered. My dad's hand paused mid-scroll, and in that moment, I felt a surge of power I hadn't known I could hold. The truth. And the people behind it were on my side. I laid the envelope on the coffee table and opened it carefully, sliding the contents out. Photographs, appraisals, serial numbers. Everything Eleanor had meticulously documented. My parents leaned in and I watched their confident postures crumble subtly, like clay under pressure. "This," I said, tapping the top photograph, "isn't just paper. It's the cello. Lucy's cello. Not yours. Not the house. Not the pool." I could see the realization creeping in, unspoken, like it was carving its own lines across their faces. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it. My dad cleared his throat, a weak sound that lacked the authority he usually wielded so easily. I didn't back down. I couldn't. It was entrusted. Not loaned. Not borrowed. Entrusted. You don't get to rewrite that. The room held its breath, the air thick with tension, and for the first time, I felt like the scales were tilting in our favor. My parents didn't argue at first. They just stared, frozen like the walls themselves were judging them. I could see it in the twitch of my dad's jaw, the tight line of my mom's lips, the faint tremor in Owens's hands as he realized something serious was happening. Silence stretched, thick and unrelenting, like it had been waiting for this exact moment to weigh down on everyone. I felt it settle over me too, but differently. This silence wasn't a threat. It was anticipation. I had Eleanor, the proof, and the moral right to stand here and demand restitution. My fingers itched to snap everything into place, to make sure my parents understood exactly what they had done and the consequences they would now face. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for justice, and in that room, justice had a face, and it was mine. Finally, my mom spoke. Her voice was high, tight, the kind of carefully maintained tone meant to mask panic. "Harper, you don't understand." I cut her off. My voice calm but sharp, precise like Eleanor had coached me to be. "I understand perfectly. You sold something that didn't belong to you. You treated it as disposable. You poured the money into something you decided was more important than me or my future." I watched the color drain from my dad's face as my words landed. He opened his mouth, then shut it. I could see him scrambling mentally, looking for any excuse, any justification, but there wasn't one, not a real one. The cello wasn't theirs. The money wasn't theirs. The right to decide for me wasn't theirs. Owen shifted uneasily on the couch, and I realized I needed to anchor him too. "Owen, sit down," I said gently, my tone softening because he was innocent in all of this. He obeyed, a small nod, eyes wide. My parents were still frozen, stuck somewhere between disbelief and panic. I laid out the documents carefully, spreading the photographs, appraisals, and correspondence across the coffee table. Each piece was a hammer striking reality. Eleanor documented everything, every serial number, every appraisal, every letter. "It's not negotiable. The cello belongs to me. It always has." My mom's hand trembled as she reached for the papers, but I pulled back slightly. "Don't touch. Not yet. Listen, these aren't suggestions. They're facts." The room held its breath again, and I could see it, the first cracks in the armor of entitlement my parents had worn for years. My dad's usual smirk had disappeared. My mom's confident posture was gone, replaced with a hesitant slump, the way someone does when the rules they thought they controlled suddenly shift beneath their feet. I realized then that the battle wasn't about the cello alone. It was about boundaries, about respect, about proving that I wasn't someone who could be dismissed or silenced. I wasn't a secondary character in my own life story anymore. And if Eleanor had taught me anything, it was that the right people with the right documentation and the courage to act, could force accountability, even in a family like mine. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension hang in the air. "We're going to fix this," I said, voice low but steady. "You're going to return what doesn't belong to you, and you're going to understand that actions have consequences. I don't want arguments. I don't want excuses. Just the truth, finally." My parents blinked, mouths opening and closing without words. And for the first time in years, I realized they had no control over the next steps. I did. The confrontation didn't get easier as the minutes ticked by. My parents shuffled uneasily in the living room, glancing at each other, as if silently negotiating who would speak. First and failing spectacularly, I kept my gaze on them, unblinking, refusing to give them the comfort of distraction or denial. "Let's be clear," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about anger. It's about accountability. You sold something entrusted to me and spent it on something trivial. It's not just money. It's a part of my life, my training, my future. And I will not accept that it's negotiable." My mom's fingers twitched near the coffee table, but she didn't reach. My dad's jaw clenched, and I knew he was trying to calculate damage control. Too late. The damage was already documented, and the evidence wasn't going anywhere. I pulled out my phone showing timestamps, bank transfer records, even a few innocuous social media posts my mom had made about the amazing backyard project each. One landed like a physical thump in the room, and I watched the careful facades on their faces fracture under the weight of proof. "This isn't about interpretation," I said, tapping the screen. "It's facts. You can't twist them, you can't justify them, and you can't erase them. The cello belongs to me, period." The room went quiet, except for Owen's quiet fidgeting, and I realized that silence had become my ally. It allowed my words to stretch, to breathe, to land with the precision Eleanor had taught me. My dad finally spoke, voice low and shaky, the self-assurance he usually carried completely gone. "Harper, I didn't think." I cut him off sharply. "You didn't think? That's your excuse? You didn't think a child's future, their passion, their inheritance mattered?" I could see the heat rise in my mom's cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped, realizing I wasn't done. "No more excuses. No more justifications. You treated something irreplaceable, like a check to cash. You've underestimated me, and now it's time you understood the consequences of that choice." I could feel my heart pounding, but beneath it was something steady, something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not over them, not entirely, but over the narrative. The cello, my future, my integrity, all were mine to defend. Eleanor's guidance, the evidence, the clarity of right and wrong had transformed fear into purpose. And purpose is heavier than anger. It carries authority. I pressed the documents closer to my chest, letting them see physically the weight of proof that couldn't be argued away. They sat in silence, trapped between the recognition of wrongdoing and the instinct to resist. I knew their next words would reveal whether they truly understood the magnitude of what they'd done, or if they would keep scrambling for excuses. I waited, calm, focused, unyielding. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from yelling, bargaining, or pleading. Sometimes it comes from standing still, unwavering, with proof in your hands and truth in your voice. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, heavy and confused, but I refused to look away. Every second of hesitation from them was an opening for me to cement my authority, my right, and my resolve. I pulled the folder Eleanor had prepared from my backpack, the one brimming with appraisals, letters, timestamps, and legal notes. I spread it across the coffee table like a shield, a map, a warning, and a declaration all at once. "Here," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Everything you need to understand why this isn't negotiable. This isn't about money. This isn't about convenience. This is about property entrusted to me, and the law recognizes that trust. Every step you took to Pretend it wasn't yours to sell is documented. Here. My parents shifted uncomfortably. And for the first time, I saw the realization hitting my mom. Like a cold splash of water, this wasn't just an argument I could be coaxed out of with charm or manipulation. I went peeked from behind my mom, eyes wide, and I realized I had to anchor him. It's not about yelling, Owen. It's about what's right, I said quietly, brushing a hand over his hair. He nodded, still clinging to his tablet like a lifeboat. But I could see he understood the seriousness. My mom's hand hovered over the papers as if touching them might erase the reality they carried. My dad's posture was defensive, elbows on knees, shoulders tight, a man realizing the universe didn't bend to his convenience. I let my gaze sweep over them evenly, my own body calm, controlled, and unflinching. Eleanor had taught me the power of quiet authority, of letting facts and moral clarity speak louder than volume or threats. I began to go through the folder, methodically, piece by piece. The serial numbers, the appraisals, the photographs of the cello carefully documented, with every detail accounted for, legal notes from Eleanor explaining trust ownership, with clear instructions that I was the rightful beneficiary. Every document landed like a hammer, each one reinforcing the claim I had to reclaim what had been taken. My parents glanced at each other, panic slowly creeping into the edges of their expressions. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to conjure a defense. My mom swallowed hard, the habitual smirk missing, replaced with the thin mask of desperation. Then I said what I knew would hit hardest. You've had weeks to justify yourself, to rewrite the story, to pretend that what you did wasn't wrong, but the truth is in front of you and you can't change it. You have no legal right to keep this. None. The cello isn't a family asset. It's mine, entrusted, protected, and I have Eleanor on my side. And she isn't someone who overlooks stolen property. My words were steady, precise, deliberate. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to plead. Everything I said was anchored in truth, evidence, and the certainty that for once I would not be dismissed. They sank back into the couch, faces pale, realizing the gravity of the storm they had brought into their own home, and in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Owning your power didn't always feel victorious at first. It felt heavy, tense, and terrifying. But it was necessary. For me, for the cello, for the respect I had waited years to claim. The battle wasn't over, but the first move had been made. And the rules were finally clear. I was in control. The next step felt surreal. I wasn't used to wielding this kind of authority in my own home, but Eleanor had drilled into me the importance of follow-through. Proof alone wasn't enough, action had to match intention. I sat back, exhaled slowly, and started making calls. Not to friends, not to sympathetic ears, but to people who had the power to enforce the truth. Eleanor had provided me with the right numbers. The collector who had purchased the cello, the lawyer who handled trust recoveries, and even a contact at the bank who could verify the transaction. Every call I made tightened the net around my parents' carelessness. My fingers trembled only a little. Mostly I felt that strange, heavy mix of fear and anticipation, the kind that makes adrenaline taste metallic in your mouth. My mom hovered near the doorway, lips pressed tight, trying to look casual, but her eyes betrayed her panic. "Harper, you don't have to do this," she said, voice quiet, a whisper that carried more desperation than authority. I looked at her calmly. "No, Mom, I do. You sold what wasn't yours to sell. And now you're going to see the consequences of your choices. This isn't a lecture. This is fact." I could see her shoulders tighten, and my dad shifted in his seat, the weight of our conversation pressing down on him like gravity itself. The room, once filled with the casual noise of our family life, now felt like a courtroom. Every glance, every slight movement carried meaning. And I finally understood what Eleanor had always meant when she talked about moral leverage. It wasn't just about evidence. It was about demonstrating that you would not be moved. By mid-afternoon, the first pieces of progress started to arrive. The lawyer on the other, and if one call confirmed, transaction was reversible. contingent on evidence which I had meticulously documented. The collector, surprisingly cooperative, had been persuaded that this wasn't a matter of personal vendetta, but of legal and ethical obligation. And finally, the bank confirmed an audit could temporarily freeze the funds while the trust claim was enforced. Each confirmation landed like a small, precise victory, and I could feel my own confidence solidifying for the first time in years. I realized that adults didn't always get to write the rules. Sometimes consequences did. Sometimes truth did. I glanced at Owen, who was nervously hovering nearby. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He nodded, and for a fleeting second, I saw the relief in his eyes, a recognition that fairness could exist even in a family where it often didn't. My parents, however, were another matter entirely. They sat frozen, exchanging glances that were half panic, half anger, and entirely unproductive. The cello had become more than an object. It was a symbol, a litmus test of boundaries and respect. And they were failing spectacularly. By evening, the first formal notices began to arrive. Emails from the lawyer, official confirmations from the collector, and a polite but firm message from Eleanor that all actions would proceed in accordance with the trust. My parents couldn't ignore them and couldn't spin them, couldn't hope that I would back down. Every small movement of paper and pen reinforced the authority I now held. I watched as their composure eroded, realizing that the house they thought was their stage for control was now a courtroom of reality. And I was the one holding the gavel, and in that moment, I felt something rare and powerful. The clarity of justice. Not revenge, not anger, not spectacle, justice. The cello wasn't just a musical instrument anymore. It was proof that boundaries exist, that the future of a child cannot be gambled away, and that sometimes the quietest voice, armed with evidence and courage, can rewrite the rules of an entire household. The morning the cello was returned, I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. I drove over to the storage facility where the collector had kept it temporarily, every red light on the way feeling like a countdown. Owen sat quietly beside me, clutching his small backpack, his fingers tapping against the seat, the kind of nervous energy that mirrored my own. When we arrived, the doors swung open, and there it was, my cello, gleaming in its hard case, untouched and pristine, as if it had been waiting for me to reclaim it all along. I knelt beside it, running my hands over the smooth wood, the polished surface reflecting the fluorescent lights above. The smell of varnish and wood filled my nose, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of completeness. This wasn't just an instrument. It was a lifeline, a symbol of authority, respect, and the power of standing firm. The staff at the facility watched me carefully, offering polite smiles but no commentary. I opened the case slowly, letting Owen peek in first. His eyes widened, and I felt a small smile tug at my lips. "It's yours," I whispered, almost reverently, "all yours." He nodded, but I could see he understood that this wasn't about him. It was about the fact that some things cannot be taken lightly, and some injustices cannot be ignored. I lifted the cello carefully, feeling its weight in my arms, the familiar balance and the hum of potential resonating through my fingertips. I had Eleanor to thank, of course, but more than that, I had the conviction that I would not bend, no matter how much history and family politics tried to sway me. When I finally walked back into the house, my parents were already there, looking smaller than I remembered. Their expressions carried a mix of awe, shame, and disbelief. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't need to. The cello, resting securely in my arms, spoke louder than any argument I could make. "It's here," I said simply, placing it on its stand in my room. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it. My dad's shoulders slumped. For once, silence wasn't oppressive. It was acknowledgement, it was understanding without words. Over the next few days, the atmosphere shifted. I could see the impact of the consequences settling into their consciousness. They couldn't erase what had been done. They couldn't reverse the proof. but they could begin to understand that my voice mattered, that my boundaries were not negotiable, and that trust is fragile but enforceable when supported by truth. I started practicing again in earnest, feeling the resonance of the cello under my bow, the music filling the space that had once been tense with avoidance and unspoken resentment. Each note was a reminder that justice, even delayed, could restore not only what was taken, but the dignity of the one it belonged to. And then slowly the family learned the rhythm of accountability. My parents were quieter, more measured. They watched, listened, sometimes stepped back instead of barging in. Owen adjusted too, learning that rules exist for a reason, that fairness has weight, and I realized something profound. Reclaiming the cello wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that courage, preparation, and truth could reshape the balance of power. Even in a house built on entitlement and habitual disregard, I finally felt at home again, not just in my room, but in my life, in my choices, and in the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how small or large the battlefield may seem. By the time spring rolled around, the house felt entirely different. Not because walls had been repainted or rooms rearranged, but because the energy had shifted. I walked into my room and saw the cello gleaming in its stand, perfectly positioned, the humidifier humming softly like a gentle promise. It was no longer a symbol of conflict or betrayal. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that boundaries once claimed could not be violated. I ran my fingers along the strings and lifted the bow, feeling the familiar tension and potential in my hands. Every note I played resonated not just through the room, but through the weeks of struggle, confrontation, and unwavering determination. Owen peeked in quietly, grinning shyly as he watched me perform a few scales. I nodded at him, the unspoken understanding passing between us. This was our victory. Quiet but undeniable. My parents, meanwhile, had begun adjusting to the consequences of their choices. There were no grand apologies, some things are too heavy for theatrics, but their posture around me and Owen had changed. They listened more, questioned less, and for the first time, I noticed hesitation in the way they attempted to override decisions that didn't belong to them. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was real, and more importantly, it was enforceable. I realized then that asserting yourself doesn't require loud confrontations or dramatic. It requires clarity, evidence, and the courage to follow through when everyone else expects silence. The cello had become more than an instrument. It had become a teacher in its own right, reminding me that fairness and justice could be claimed and defended, even within the walls of a family. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. My first audition with the Regional Youth Orchestra. The nerves buzzed through me like electricity, but the cello felt steady in my hands, a trusted partner rather than a fragile possession. As I played, each note echoed through the hall with confidence, richness, and pride. Every passage was a testament to the weeks of struggle, the confrontation, and the courage it had taken to reclaim what was mine. When the judges' nods and smiles confirmed my acceptance, I realized the lesson extended far beyond music. It was about ownership of self, courage in adversity, and the knowledge that standing firm for what's right yields more than restitution. It yields freedom. Back at home, the house had settled into a rhythm that finally matched the lives within it. Eleanor's guidance remained in my mind, a quiet but insistent reminder that preparation and resolve matter. Owen and I practiced together sometimes, laughter filling the spaces that tension had once dominated. My parents had retreated into their routines, diminished but no longer threatening, and I knew they would think twice before attempting to overstep boundaries again. The cello remained a symbol of that victory, a tangible reminder of the power of persistence, justice, and truth. And for the first time in years, I felt entirely in control, not over anyone else, but over my own life, my choices, and the music that defined both. Standing by the window one evening, bow in hand, I breathed in the quiet of a house restored to its rightful balance. The strings vibrated beneath my fingers, resonating not just with sound, but with proof, courage, preparation. And honesty can reclaim what was once stolen, heal what was broken, and create a future where respect is non-negotiable. And in that music and that clarity, I finally felt home.